Are the Boston Celtics trading Anfernee Simons for a center? Because we all know they need to shore up that front court. On today's edition of Boston Celtics Today by Chat Sports, a Celtics insider by the name of Brian Robb shared his ideal Anfernee Simons trade return if and when the Celtics end up dealing the newly acquired guard. Before we get into that, though, I got a challenge for the Green Teamers out there. Knicks Now host Marshall Green was talking a bunch of smack to me earlier in the office, and he said that Celtics Today is doomed. We are in the dust right now, and we can't even get 300 likes on a video. So prove him wrong. Go down below and smash that thumbs up icon if you hate the Knicks and Marshall Green. All right, the situation we know all summer long is that the Celtics have made Anfernee Simons available via trade ever since dealing for him in the Drew Holiday trade back in June. They've yet to introduce him to the media and put up a jersey with the Simons number 4 out there. So they still kind of have him available for trade all the way leading up to training camp. But there we know there's been no market to this point, and the Celtics will probably have Anfernee Simons into this season. But that season will be used to up his trade value and help the Celtics get further and further towards that luxury tax line. And unfortunately, Anfernee Simons is going to be a casualty of that as they don't have many contracts to trade. Here's what Brian Robb had to say. He said, trading for a center has to be one of the biggest priorities for the Celtics front office this season and is probably going to be part of the reason right now why Simons is still on the Celtics. Boston simply does not have much movable salary on their roster right now beyond the core pieces outside of Anfernee Simons. And look, outside of the core pieces, you can even count these two guys as core pieces. Boston's not trading the value of the contracts that they have on Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser. Pritchard making $7.5, $8 million a season over the next two, and Sam Hauser making $10 million a year. For a 40%, 42% three-point shooter, you just don't give that up. It's a great deal, and the Celtics know that, and they've kind of held him, as Sam Hauser, out of trade conversations this offseason. More from Brian Robb here about where the Celtics go. Boston has started accumulating some team-building weapons in the form of some traded player exceptions, but those won't be of use until next summer at the earliest, if and when Boston gets under the luxury tax threshold. For now, Simons is the team's only tool to bring back significant salary without touching its core, so they will want to use him wisely for the purposes in weighing deal options. His value on the market is obviously not great at the moment, given the Celtics have been testing his value this summer, but when they do move him, those moves should ultimately lead in part to landing a center, even if it doesn't happen directly. And I think that's a big point to focus on here, too, even if it doesn't happen directly. Trades within the new CBA and the NBA are so difficult. Teams can't take back more. A lot of teams are already hard capped at the first apron. They cannot take more back in a trade than they would be sending out. And, there aren't a lot of centers that kind of fit that salary mold of Anfernee Simons. It makes $27 million. So not only are you trying to bring back a competent center back to Boston, but you're also trying to shed enough money where you get closer and closer to the luxury tax line where a couple more ancillary deals around the edges can get you below the tax and avoid those repeater penalties. Because if the Celtics have Anfernee Simons on the roster all the way up until free agency next year, then they are going to get hit with repeater tax penalties after a year where they probably didn't compete all that much for an NBA championship. So it makes the most sense to make a deal for Anfernee Simons, and Brad Stevens knows that. He's waiting until the right deal comes along for Simons. He's going to pull the trigger on when that deal comes along, but hopefully it ends up being for a center, as we know the Celtics have a lot of question marks in their front court at this point. So some center trade targets for the Celtics. Let's start off with Nick Claxton here, who makes around $20 to $25 million a season, and look, this wouldn't be shedding a lot of money off your books if you're the Boston Celtics. And if that is your goal in part of trading Anfernee Simons away, then this would not be a big-time target for you. But he's a young, ascending center. He's evolving his offensive game a little bit, and we know how good of a rebounder and shot blocker that Nick Claxton is. The C's clearly do not have a lot of those types of archetypes on their roster right now, and this is about as good as it gets as far as a rim-protecting, rim-running, around-the-basket type of center who's also expanding his game a little bit as well. I would call the Brooklyn Nets, but I wouldn't hold my breath on Nick Claxton being the trade return for Anfernee Simons unless the Celtics probably threw a sweetener or two in the deal in the form of a draft pick. Daniel Gafford is the name I have on this list, and he just signed a contract extension, so I don't think it's entirely too likely, but I also don't think that contract extension necessarily take you out of trade conversations. Just giving you more money. He's going to be playing on about a $13 million a year contract this season. So finding some sort of deal that works with Dallas by February would probably be pretty difficult. But, Gafford for an around the rim lob threat, big body, elite rebounding big, like $20 million is probably a decent price for him down the line. So you make this deal right now. His money kind of blossoms a little bit more next season when that extension starts kicking in. And then you have a center of the future here. He's like 28 years old. He's perfectly on the Jays timeline. And if you can get Anfernee Simons down to Dallas for Daniel Gafford, who a team in the Mavs who probably kind of need a big scoring point guard in the absence of Kyrie Irving here. It's definitely something to monitor as the season goes along. These next two names, I'm not that keen on bringing to Boston, but they do definitely help you get your salary tax or your salary books cleaned up a little bit more. Yusuf Nurkic is making like $19 million this season, and that is by no means the value that he should be earning in the NBA, especially on his next contract that'll hit next summer. But, as far as familiarity with the Utah Jazz and making deals with them, they just did it sending away George Niang over there for nothing in a salary dump. I think that there's a chance that the Jazz could want to do something like this, but at the same time, you got to factor in who they have on their roster, and players like Keontae George, Isaiah Collier. Like, this would just be a rental for the Jazz. I feel like the Celtics or teams interested in Anfernee Simons at some point would want to bring him on as they are contending, and as they think they can help him, he can help them push them over the top. So the Jazz aren't really in that position at this point. So Nurkic, I'm not so sure that he would be the move. Nikola Vucevic, interesting. I think he's a little bit more interesting than Nurkic in the fact that he only makes like about $500,000 more on his deal. He comes off of the books as well at the end of this next season. But both of these two guys play negative defense, and I don't think they would contribute much to the Celtics winning basketball games this year. So who knows if either of those guys or those names popping up for Brad Stevens would be worthwhile, because you don't even clear $10 million in salary cap by trading Simons away for one of those two guys. My last name here, this could be the one. Isaiah Stewart. I like Isaiah Stewart a lot, and I think the Celtics losing Al Horford, losing Kristaps Porzingis, you lose a couple of dogs. Like, those guys weren't afraid to get their nose into some scuffles out there in the basketball court. We know how Isaiah Stewart operates around those. So, like, I think this is awesome. He's a small ball center. Teams like to run small ball centers, guys who can move around the floor, be switchable on defense in the postseason. So this would be a really, really good signing here. You can kind of platoon him and Neemias Queta a little bit. If you want a little bit more size, you can go with Queta. If you want, and obviously Isaiah Stewart would be the starter in that scenario. But if you want a little bit more size, you can go to Queta off the bench. But Isaiah Stewart there, a little bit more of a floor spacer than Queta can be. Good enough defender, and he can guard multiple positions as well. So if I had to choose one out of these five names, I would be going after Isaiah Stewart here. It doesn't make a ton of money, but at the same time, the Pistons, they have a guy like Jaden Ivey, who's a nice scoring point guard off of the bench. They have enough defense in their backcourt right now, but they still need a couple more shot creators on that team, in my opinion. I think that Brad Stevens could end up making Anfernee Simons a viable asset for the Pistons, which net Isaiah Stewart back to Boston. That would be my pick. What's your pick? You choose the center that the Celtics should trade for down in the comment section. Name a center that Boston should go out there and make a deal for, probably and presumptively including Anfernee Simons in that trade. Let me know down in the comments. Next, we have an NBA insider saying that the Celtics are tanking this season. And one move that they made this offseason was the trigger point to why he thinks that way. We'll tell you guys in just a moment. But first, get hooked up with this awesome deal. And it's not the same deal that we've been running here on the channel as of late. Celtics hoodies are on sale. They are on a big sale. They are 40% off at this link right here, chatsports.com/bosshoodie. Chatsports.com/bosshoodie. The season is right around the corner. Weather's about to get chilly. The leaves are about to start falling. So go get yourself a hoodie for a discount. 40% off. Chatsports.com/bosshoodie. That link's in the comment section and description of today's video. Oh, the Boston Celtics tanking this season. They're definitely going to make a trade at some point, I think. But in the sense of tanking, this team, we do know the roster's not great. And the ceiling on this roster is not usually where it is, because Jason Tatum is not going to be out there on the basketball floor. And Brad Stevens, after coming to that realization that Tatum would be out all of this season, started making moves and started unloading salaries that, for many people thought that they weren't all that movable. And Brad Stevens made these moves and really dumped not only Kristaps Porzingis, but also George Niang into just literally no money at all. Got all $30 million of Porzingis' contract off of their books. Got most of Drew Holiday's contract off of their books. And specifically in the Holiday deal, you get off of the extension, like the years on that contract are really what the kicker is. And hopefully at some point this season, they'll be able to get off of Anfernee Simons. But that probably means that they're not looking to really compete in the Eastern Conference. And that's not really what Brad Stevens has signaled to me so far this offseason. Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated saying the following. He says that the Celtics need help in the front court. I just don't think you can do anything but maybe get into the playoff field with that front court. And they're not operating like a team that's interested in doing that. They traded George Niang. George Niang would have been that guy that started at power forward. They gave him away. They just gave him away to Utah. And look, Mannix did mention this as well, that it's not like George Niang is a needle-moving player, but he is absolutely serviceable, and he's won a lot of games in this league, and he's been a contributor on a lot of big-time winning teams. If you date back to 2020, the most winningest player in the NBA is George Niang. So, like, he absolutely can contribute for successful basketball teams, but it doesn't seem like that was the priority for Boston, keeping him around this upcoming year on an $8 million deal. So they just decided to dump the salary, and this is where they're at now. And it doesn't look like they're going to be, one of the East premier teams heading into next year. More from Mannix. He says, this is a team that is functioning like a team that wants to get through the year, don't get anybody really injured, and get a high draft pick. They're not operating like a team that really gives a damn about this season, at least from the front office perspective. Yes, we've heard from Peyton Pritchard, from Joe Mazzulla, from Jaylen Brown, Derek White, all these guys saying they're going to compete this year. We're not going into the season tanking. But that's not really all the way up to them. Like, the front office makes decisions and puts out a roster that either is a contender or it's not. And from the ways that we've seen everything so far unfold this offseason, it is not a contender. Chris Mannix said that the Celtics are in store for a season of quote-unquote mediocrity. That could result in a play-in appearance. I'm of the camp that probably is more in favor of getting a lottery ball than the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, but to each their own on that. One way or another, the Celtics season is going to end around that 500 mark because they're not good enough to contend at the top of the East, and they're not bad enough to be at the bottom feeder down low and get like a top 3 draft odds before the lottery. Look, we knew this going in. We knew the Boston Celtics were not going to be the league's best contender, not only without Jason Tatum, but obviously after trading Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, and then losing Al Horford and Luke Kornet in free agency. Every move that Brad Stevens has made or not made this offseason, i.e. bringing back one of those guys in free agency, signals to me that the priority is getting close to, if not under the luxury tax entirely by the end of this season, not building a contender for 25-26. If you look at this roster right now, there is not a player in the Celtics front court that is a starting level NBA big, and that's just the reality of the situation. So based on everything we've seen this offseason, the priority for Boston, their front office, seems like getting on that luxury tax, cleaning up their books, and being ready to build a contender for 26-27 and beyond, not this season. What do you guys think the Celtics finish this season in the Eastern Conference? Where will the Celtics finish in the standings? What seed will they earn before the playoffs begin? Let me know what you guys think before the season begins down below. Make sure you are following me over on Twitter at Tyler J. Smith, 2 H's because the name's common, but I am not. And make sure you are subscribed to the channel as well. We'll be updating you guys on all the latest trade updates and reports that we get about Anfernee Simons until that deal ends up being made. We'll see you guys in the next one. And as always, let's go C's.